that if you'd like to look at this again afterwards, I'll send you the recording after today's session. If you'd like to share it with anyone in your organization, feel free to share it. And if you I'll offer it out to people in the network that registered who perhaps can't make it, because not everybody is able to make it. Sometimes we get things come up last minute. But thank you all for joining this morning. So today we're talking about how to handle difficult conversations. And first things first, I run these sessions fairly regularly. This is the last one for a while because I'm off on holiday next week for a little while, so I'll be back in October. But these sessions are an opportunity just to step off the treadmill, kind of stop with all the busyness that goes on in our work lives, and just give you a bit of thinking space. So this morning's session is about thinking space. I also want to cover some topics this morning that aren't obvious. So a lot of the time, if you think about the topic of handling difficult conversations, there's a lot of advice that goes along with that. What I want to share with you this morning are some things that perhaps you hadn't thought of, not the obvious things around handling difficult conversations, because hopefully that's where the value is. So let me make a start. So we're going to talk about, if we think about difficult conversations, the reason we want to have difficult conversations, especially if we're leaders in a business, is normally because there's some kind of behavioral challenge or there's an underperformance issue, right? That's what difficult conversations tend to entail. And so in order to handle those, actually, sometimes we need to go a couple of steps backwards. So I'm going to talk this morning a little bit about why people underperform, right? What does the research say? Why do people tend to underperform? Then we'll talk about how to handle underperformance, and difficult conversations are part of that performance management process. And then we'll look at, beyond that, actually, if we think about reviewing and accelerating performance beyond just the difficult conversation, how do we get people tuned back in? So that's the whole idea of this morning's session. So I'll probably take 20, 25 minutes to cover that. And then once we've covered that, I'll stop with the slides, open it up to discussion. We'll just have a conversation about how that's relevant to you and your business, maybe some of the insights you've gained, and maybe some of the changes you might want to make going forward. Because there's two elements to the learning. There's three elements to the learning, right? There's the content that we cover, there's the discussion and processing what it means for you, and then, of course, there's hearing what other people are going to do, because that very often triggers something in us that can be useful in terms of thinking about, the changes that we want to make ourselves. So let's go into the content this morning. Just I'll plant a seed before I go into the content. Just I'll ask you to think about what is it specifically you're looking to get from this session this morning. You don't have to answer that, but just have a think in your mind. What is it you're looking to get from this morning? Because very often just that intent, having an intent around trying to get some value can be the thing that really does help you to gain the improvement that you're looking for. It might be there's a specific situation you're dealing with right now, might be a specific team member, might be a customer, might be a colleague or a peer, but thinking about that is really useful. So just let you think about that as we go into the session. So there's this research that was done years ago, and it's by this author, Forney's, and it was in a book called Coaching for Improving Work Performance. It was published in 2000. And what the research showed was that through this study they did, there were 16 reasons why employees don't do what they are supposed to do, or what as managers and leaders we might expect them to do. And I first saw this list it was probably around 2010, and I went on a leadership development course, and this was part of what we learned. And it was really interesting for me because I started to understand, it gave me a better understanding of what I was seeing managing the different business teams that I'd worked in before. So I've just worked through these reasons because it's really interesting. So the first two are like the predominant reasons. So the first is that they don't know what they're supposed to do. So if someone's not doing what you think they should be doing or what they're supposed to be doing, it's because they don't know what they're supposed to do, right? So they don't have the capability or they don't have the knowledge. The second is that they don't know how to do it. So they don't know what to do in the first instance, and they don't know, and even if they knew what to do in the second instance, they don't know how to do it, right? So sometimes that's obviously a capability issue. But then there's some underlying reasons that are equally interesting. So people don't know why they should do it. So that's about motivation, right? if we're trying as leaders to get people to tune in and perhaps perform at a higher level, they have to understand why they would want to do that, other than it's your job and it's in your job description, right? Fourth is they think they are doing it. So people think they're doing what needs to be done, and there's a gap, and that perception gap is your perception of what they should be doing and their perception of what they should be doing. Okay. Fifth is there are obstacles beyond their control. There are things happening that they don't feel in control of that are preventing them from doing it. Six is they think it won't work. So they could do it, but actually they think if they follow that route or that change in behavior, they don't think it's going to work. So actually what we see is resistance because they don't believe it will work. And then seven is they think what they're doing today, they think their way that they're doing it already is better than what we expect as leaders. So there's inherent resistance there because they think what they're doing is better. 8 is they think something is more important, i.e. it's a priority conflict. They think there's something else that is happening that's more important than doing what we've asked them to do. And then the second kind of half of the list, the 9 to 16, this is where it gets quite interesting. So 9 is there's no positive consequence to them for doing it. So they're doing whatever they're doing at the moment. There's a gap between that and what's expected, but there's no positive consequence for them to up their performance. Which is interesting. As I think about my leadership career, I can kind of piece together, behavior that I've seen, performance that I've seen with people and their motivations. 10 is equally interesting. It's the opposite. There's no negative consequence to them for not doing it. So if we're not, challenging them, having those difficult conversations, they're like, well, why would I put more effort in if there's no negative consequence to me carrying on doing what I'm doing, which is perhaps underperformance, right? 11 is that this is interesting as well. There's a negative consequence to them for doing it. So actually, if I put in that extra discretionary effort, if I have to try harder, if I do more, actually it's a negative consequence. Maybe it makes them feel more tired. Maybe it's more difficult. Maybe they don't enjoy working at a different level or a different pace, right? So actually, it's a negative consequence. 12 is there's a positive consequence to them for not doing it. So by not changing, actually I'm more comfortable, or I'm more satisfied, or I feel more in control because I don't have to push myself outside my comfort zone. 13 is personal limits. So, incapacity, but they genuinely don't have the capability to do it. 14 is that there's something personal going on in the background that prevents them from performing or doing what they really need to be doing or should be doing. 15 is the fear of future negative consequences. So they think that if they make that change, there's going to be something in the future that could be negative for them by making that change. We see this very often in change management when you're putting new initiatives in and people might say, well, does that put me at risk? Or does that put my department at risk? Or does that put my team at risk? Or so you can start to see some of those fear of future negative consequences. And then 16 is that no one could do it. Sometimes we're asking the impossible. And that sounds like an odd one, but I have worked in businesses where they set such aggressive timelines that actually you almost from the outset you're like, I'm not sure that's possible, and then you have to adjust as you go along. So sometimes sometimes that's true, right? No one could do it. It's not possible to be done in that time. Although I do like the quote, those people who say something's impossible shouldn't stop those people doing it from progressing. So we have to take that with a pinch of salt. But you can see this is interesting because this is the backdrop of what is it that causes underperformance in the first place. And then when we start to think about difficult conversations, this is interesting by this psychologist and neuroleadership senior scientist at NYU. She talks about research that she's done that suggests that by switching the expectations in a culture and from employees, we switch it from giving feedback, I expect to be given feedback from my manager, for example. We switch the culture from giving feedback to asking for it. So instead of waiting to be given feedback, I prompt for it. I'm asking for feedback on a regular basis. And when organizations can tilt the culture in that direction, They see this continuous improvement culture, better decision making, smarter decision making, stronger, more resilient teams that can adapt when they need to adapt because they are always on the lookout for that feedback. And this is something that's interesting. These cultures don't happen unless somebody intentionally starts to build them and create them. So this for me, when I first kind of had this as part of my leadership approach, it was a big part of starting to have those conversations with people about how they can start to invite feedback. And it starts with leaders, right? Leaders have to demonstrate this themselves by inviting feedback from their teams. And as it says here, this quote from David Hayne, leaders not only have to model the giving of feedback, but also the receiving of feedback in a positive way. If our teams see us being defensive or resistant to feedback ourselves, that's the kind of culture that starts to develop. So then I love these quotes here. So researchers found that 87% of employees want to be developed in their job and want feedback. But interestingly, there's this gap. Only a third report actually receiving the feedback they need to engage and improve. So 87% saying they want it, only a third receiving it. And then 17% of employees said that of that third that said they get feedback, only 17% said the feedback they receive is meaningful or useful. So that's interesting. So even when they get feedback, they're not finding it valuable or useful. And then this was interesting. The report, it was a research report saying that millennials and the next generation, Gen Z, desire more feedback. They want more feedback, and I've certainly seen this as true with the clients I work with and the teams I lead. They want more feedback than other generations, and they're kind of looking for a real frequency, probably more like weekly, rather than waiting till either monthly reviews or quarterly reviews, and in the worst case, annual appraisals. But really starting to recognize this ability in a culture to start to create feedback cycles, more frequent feedback cycles, so that people get used to it and it builds resilience. So let's talk about how we start to do some of this work. We know that the science and the research. So there's this model that I use, and if you've been on this call before, you'll remember this model. But I want to talk through the different stages. So when we're talking about giving feedback, there are a few conditions that we have to get in place that make the giving and receiving of feedback effective. And I like to think about this kind of 5-stage model called the coach model. And the first stage of the coach model, when we think about coaching as a leadership style, because actually if we want to start to give really effective feedback and we want change, we can't just have a difficult conversation, give people feedback and then expect them to change. We have to blend coaching into that conversation or the change won't stick. So the way that we do that is to follow a process. And the start of the process, you'll see there's trust and relationships in the middle. The reason that's there is because if you've been in a business where the culture is directive management rather than coaching as a leadership style, and people start to introduce coaching, there's some suspicion creeps in. People are like, well, hold on a minute, why are you asking me loads of questions? So you might find that people are defensive towards it. But so what we do instead is we start the process through what I call this principle, which is contracting. And contracting is from professional executive coaching. And what contracting enables us to do is to start to talk about standards, behaviors, changes in the working culture. And so a contracting conversation could include having difficult conversations, making a commitment to your team that says, as and when it becomes necessary for us to have difficult conversations, I'd like us to be able to do that in a positive way. So agreeing in advance that you will have those conversations makes those conversations easier. So all of a sudden, a difficult conversation is something that's more natural in the environment. And that's how we start to normalize them rather than build them up as something that's really tough and almost impossible to do, which is what we see with a lot of organizations and the cultures. And then, of course, we think about objectives and goals. So when we think about underperformance, if people haven't had a conversation about what their role entails, what high performance in that role looks like, what the objectives and goals and expectations are, then there's an immediate disconnect between what they deliver day to day and what's been agreed with them. So all of a sudden, we don't have clarity. So we have to have these, two really important milestones or foundations in place in order to be able to effectively have the conversation. And then the final couple of stages, which are worth touching on, action and observation. So actually having time on a regular basis, seeing what your team are doing. So, maybe accompanying them at meetings. It might be giving them a space at a team meeting to present or do something. It might be, if they're involved in organizational meetings, perhaps tagging along to a few of their meetings, just so that you start to see them in action. And the idea of doing that is, one, to support them, but two, to be able to then have the awareness and the visibility of how they're operating, so you can start to coach them and help them to improve and develop themselves. And if you get these steps in place, actually people are open to that. They're not suspicious about it. And then the final stage here, the H is heroes in the making. That's about helping people to start to see a bigger future for themselves in the organization as part of your team, starting to help them develop and grow and set goals around their career progression. That really does, as a model, help you start to factor in a lot of these issues around underperformance. But let's talk specifically. I've got a 5-step process for dealing with underperformance. Let's talk about that, and difficult conversations are fit in within that. So the challenge is, if we don't address underperformance, we end up endorsing it. And I've seen this myself in businesses. I've been guilty of it myself in the past, where I haven't addressed, I haven't grasped the nettle in a difficult conversation, and that has led to a continuation of poor performance. Very often we have to get these conversations in as early as possible, so that we can address the situation before it becomes a bigger problem than it is. But the whole idea is that following the right leadership approach, which we just talked about, that coach model, will minimize underperformance, but there'll also always be exceptions because of normal distribution of performance in an organization. And so there's a way to handle those exceptions. The caveat to those exceptions is that we should, as leaders, be having regular one-to-one reviews with our direct reports. That one-to-one is time to do a number of things. It's to review performance, it's to give praise, and it's to handle issues, before they become too big as part of their culture, so that they become prevalent across the team. So really important that one-to-one is part of the cycle. But if we are dealing with underperformance or trying to have a difficult conversation, here are the steps that I recommend and have followed myself. So the first thing is about instigating the discussion. So letting your employee know, or a colleague, that you need to discuss something important. And if you've had a previous conversation with that employee, to say that, if in the future there's a need to have a difficult conversation, my commitment to you is that I'll do it. And that's really interesting. That's a really useful technique to say to somebody, ahead of a difficult conversation, I'd like to make a commitment to each other that as and when difficult conversations may need to be had, my commitment to you is I don't necessarily like doing it, but my commitment to you is I'll do it. That's really powerful, because then you get more respect from the other person, because they recognize, because most people don't like having difficult conversations. We can do it, but it's not something you look forward to. It's not something you relish. So actually, that's a really useful way to be able to instigate the discussion. So once you've told the employee you need to have this important conversation, the first thing to do then is to agree on the situation. So you may see it one way, they may see it another. So the most effective way to do it is to explain to your team member objectively what you're seeing. This is what I'm seeing happening, and the impact of what you're seeing. So not just the behavior, but the impact of the behavior. And it may be that if they are underperforming, someone else is having to pick up additional work. Or it may be that if they're underperforming, you're having to pick up additional work. So just explain that because this is happening, this is the impact. And then I'm an advocate for using questions and coaching as effectively as we can. So once you've explained objectively what's happening and the impact, then to ask them what's going on and how do they see it. And at this point, they may, and very often, in my experience, very often people will then say either they didn't realize, or they'll tell you that something's happening that you weren't aware of. And that's been my experience. One of those two things tends to happen. Either the person's not aware, they apologize, say, okay, right, I didn't realize it was having that impact, or there's something else happening in the background and this conversation surfaces it. So once you've agreed on the situation and kind of that may take a bit of exploration, then what we need to do once we agree, okay, so we are agreed that this is a challenge, this is the impact. Yes. The next then is to agree on the resolution. So if that's where they are today, how's the situation going to improve? And ask them to suggest how they will improve the performance or behavior. And remembering that when we end up in performance management conversations or difficult conversations, I like to visualize in my mind like a baton, right? So you go into this, I'm not going to hit anybody with it, but you go into the conversation, it's like a relay baton, right? The idea is we go into that meeting, we want the person to pick up and take the baton, right? We cannot leave that meeting holding the baton as a manager. Otherwise, we're the ones in the frame for the performance, and it's not ours, it's theirs to improve. So once we've had a conversation, how are you going to improve this? You want to get to a point where you can agree on very specific changes and then the support or review that you will offer. So it's their performance to improve. You can support them to improve it, but it's their performance. They've got to really take that to heart themselves. And then once you've agreed on the resolution, these are the things they're going to do. That normally is where people stop. So say, okay, great, thanks. Let's catch up again, right? The next two steps are really important. The fourth step is after they've agreed on the specific changes, then it's about gaining commitment. So gaining commitment to change and being clear on the implications with the person. So asking them, how committed are you to make this work, to turn this around, to make this improvement? Because without that final step, it's almost like leverage. So we really want to get leverage on people so that they recognize that this isn't like a course correction and in a week or two they can start to drift again. We really want them to take this seriously. This has to be a sustained improvement. And I'm a fan of making a commitment to review and help them to focus on the performance goals that you've agreed. So we want to get people back on track with the performance goals that they have documented, hopefully, and that they're working on. And then once you've got that commitment, and it's a kind of whites of the eyes moment, looking people whites of the eyes, how committed are you to make this work? And getting their commitment to make the change and sustain it. And then the final step is about future pacing. So equally important to start to discuss specific future situations where you or they might anticipate issues or further drift from performance, and start to say, well, what happens when you get busy? Or what happens, maybe if you've gone on holiday, or what happens when you will know through that performance conversation what those risk factors are, and start to get that person thinking about, oh yes, when that happens, sometimes I do go off track, or I do get stressed, or I get overwhelmed, or I start to drop off, or whatever, and then help them to start to identify proactive measures to address them in advance. And that becomes part of your review conversation with them as you're reviewing and following up. So you'll see it's quite having this structure in place and preparing. So whenever I've had these conversations, I've prepared in advance just to make sure that I'm going to cover all 5 of these areas. And that as a simple kind of almost step-by-step process for handling difficult conversations, dealing with underperformance is really, really effective, but not something that's perhaps immediately something that you would think about in terms of how to handle underperformance and address those difficult conversations. Okay, so let's. I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to talk for about 20-25 minutes. So that's the content part of today's session. Let's have a conversation then about what you were thinking as I was going through that I could see the cogs whirring. A few of you were making notes. What occurred to you as we were going through that session today?
I think that there were some really good points in your slide of all the different reasons why someone you may need to have that conversation with somebody. So I think
Yeah.
it's just being mindful of all those things, especially when, for example, personal things, so things that may be happening outside of work, and
Yes.
we're often focused on the day-to-day, what's happening in work.
Mm.
So just being mindful, I think that, what else could be going on.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
guess that could be if there's certainly if there's a change in someone's behavior short term, there could be
Mm.
something else going on outside that maybe, as opposed to perhaps something that's longer term,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
performance behavioral,
Yeah. Maybe they're spending every waking hour decorating or something, Brian.
Possibly, yeah. It's like painting the fourth bridge, honestly.
They're absolutely exhausted. But no, I make a joke of it, but it's an important point because we'll often see that. It's a bit, we didn't cover it today, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you talk about safety and psychological needs, and then you talk about kind of belonging needs, and actually, if somebody's got something serious going on in their personal life,
Mm.
if it's a health issue, or if it's a relationship issue, or it's a financial issue, then it's really difficult to separate yourself from that issue. It could be nagging in somebody's mind in the background all the time, and it can affect performance. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes just giving people the space to talk through that, even if you can't help them resolve it, you can support them. Actually, that ability in our teams to be able to talk about it, to know that someone else is supportive, sometimes that could be all it takes just to give them the confidence to re-engage and get back to the level of performance they know is the right level for them.
Yeah.
Yes, good. Thanks, Brian.
I'm just wondering if
Hmm.
see, a lot of us have worked in different environments, but especially now it's mostly the hybrid. Whether that actually makes this a little bit more of a challenge because people aren't seeing each other as they would around the coffee machine. They're not sort
Yeah.
of having the intel they would have had. So these conversations are even more important because it's the one way to find out, as you say, exactly what is going on. You can't just pick up the vibes or whatever from being in the office. Well, that isn't happening as much. So I
Yeah.
think this thing can either be drifting onwards for longer, unless you take action.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. We don't have that same level of contact, do we, and frequency of contact with people. So arguably, it's more difficult to pick up when someone's performance might drift, which is why those regular reviews, checking in with people, is so much more important. It's interesting because I'm seeing a lot of clients, a lot of people I'm talking to, who are saying that there is this desire to get people back into the office more frequently, more regularly. I don't know if that's wholesale across the board, but certainly almost like saying at least we can have set times when we try and get the majority of the team in. My daughter's a project manager in London, and during COVID, obviously they were completely remote working, and they've gradually over the last couple of years, went back in. Right, we want everyone back in on a Wednesday. Then they went to right, we need people in 2 days a week. And now they're up to 3 days a week. Whether or not it goes any further, I don't know. But there's definitely a shift happening.
Yeah, I agree. I was in London yesterday in a social working space, and it was absolutely packed. I was hardly desks left. So London or the city is pretty crowded. But that's on Thursday. I bet today there's nobody there, but
there's nobody. There'll be nobody
there today. But on a Thursday, it's busy. But yeah, no, I think taking action is going to be even more important as a leader. So I've benefited from having a time when I had that role modeling and that close contact with my manager, and that kind of help performance. I think it's definitely more tricky, and I think your frameworks that you've got, Justin, are even more important for leaders now because, to say it's vital that these conversations happen, and they're not happening. And I think also the coaching side. I think from a sales, I think I told you from my working in a fintech for a high pressure kind of sales environment, sales leaders particularly go down into their kind of objectives of what they want to achieve without kind of really syncing up and listening and building that rapport properly with the people that are underperforming. It's very easy to sort of to turn this into a different style of conversation, which is not productive.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. And the other thing about these conversations, it sounds obvious, but as you're planning for these conversations, and I ran a leadership workshop with a leadership team I'm working with this week, and we were talking, really fascinating. We were talking about managing underperformance of a couple of their teams, and a lot of them have fallen into the trap of becoming really directive, almost like a teacher and a pupil. Without realizing it, they've gone into this mode where it's, really directive. And what they've found is that people's performances are yo-yoing. So when they're hard on them, when they're really direct, they tend to see a spike in performance. And then the minute they're turned away, like the behavior drifts again. And it's interesting because some of that, I think, is in the style in which you have the conversation. If you're not, I think, there's a lot to be said for saying, right, actually, before I have this difficult conversation, what's the outcome I want? Right, the outcome I want is for this person to pick up responsibility, take this performance as their own. Not you don't want to continually be going back over this and having to keep course correcting people, because that's a drain on your management and your time. So actually, when you start to think, right, if I want to meet that outcome, how do I have to structure this conversation differently? It does make you think more clearly about how you do it, and coaching plays a big part in that. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, good.
Maybe just picking up on sort of what you're talking about there, and also going back to, if you like, psychological safety.
Yeah.
I can remember being on a course quite some time ago now, and it still sticks in my mind about what was referred to as the trust equation. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but basically you have three components which are above the line, which is credibility, reliability, and intimacy. And below the line is basically self-orientation or self-interest. And if you get it wrong, i.e. too much below the line, or then the trust with that individual that you're managing, or, it doesn't even have to be somebody you're managing. It can be, somebody that you're working alongside, as an example, kind of dissipates. And I just a relatively recent observation is that was what I experienced, is that there was a lot of self-interest in the conversations that were happening, and then the trust kind of basically ebbed away gradually over a period of time.
Yeah. So self-interest from the manager in the conversation. So it's not about helping that person, the team member, to improve. It was about that manager wanting it for themselves.
Yeah, because then they actually said, "Oh, we need to do this so that we can achieve the bonus." What they meant is their bonus.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, I really like that equation, actually, Gareth, because perhaps it's not something that is immediately obvious. We don't always recognize that might be almost an undercurrent in the conversation.
Yeah, and I think coming back to, if your style of management is collegiate, shall we call it, on a regular basis, then it makes having the difficult conversation easy, because you're always, it's always something that you're giving feedback, obviously, hopefully lots of positive feedback as well, and therefore your intimacy increases, and they basically trust you. They trust you that they're in a safe space, and they can say, exactly what they feel, and whether that be personal or business related.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, and I really like the idea of I like the idea of collegiate, being invested in the team, doing it, not because there's something about, if you can foster that team kind of culture, so that everybody recognizes they're not only performing and contributing for themselves, they're doing it to be part of a team that contributes towards maybe customers or the business, or maybe there's even a bit of competition within your team about outperforming other teams. All that stuff starts to drive a healthy dynamic where actually feedback becomes part of the regular conversations that are had within the team. And I've seen that before, where if you can get it right, even the teams start to, encourage each other to meet deadlines, to start to, become self-managing, to be more committed. Because it shouldn't all be in the hands of the leader. I don't think it should be and I like that word, collegiate. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gareth.
Oops.
I've got a point, if I may, just
Yeah.
for all of the comments. So for me, I kind of a bit of advice really from everyone on the group. My VP of sales has become a very negative person, and he's got a lot of pressure on him from the board. Things aren't going as well as what had been expected. Now he's in the US, so it's from the US kind of side of things. UK are doing really well. And he puts his negativity, shall we say, on our weekly calls, check-ins, etc., onto me, and I have to kind of try and shut that off. I tend to go for a walk or something after the call, because I then don't want my negativity impacting my team.
Yeah.
Sorry, his negativity impacting my team. So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that or coping mechanisms or anything, because it's getting worse. And I have tried to kind of say, can we try and make this a little bit more positive, but it's just not working. So I don't know how much pushback I can kind of give, or I don't know, I'm just kind of seeing if anyone else has been in that boat where you've been in a situation where you're surrounded by negativity and it's your job to basically keep the motivation going and keep spirits high, and I'm just finding it a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Tanya, I'm sorry you're going through that. I have been through that a few times, and it is not an easy situation. What's your relationship like with your VP?
Yeah, it's pretty good. He tends to talk a lot about himself and and not a lot about anything else. So yeah, but it's okay. I do feel open enough to be able to have a conversation with him, but it's like it just goes in one ear and out the other, basically.
Right.
So I'm just trying to just get a bit of an understanding of other ways I can try and do it without, going direct to the CEO. Maybe I don't know what the right way is, or maybe that is the right way.
Well, so I guess the question is, how have you addressed it with him previously, Tanya? What have you said to him?
That I would rather these conversations have more of a positive spin on them, rather than this is going wrong, this is going wrong, this is going wrong. Can we have a conversation about what could go right? And he's like, yep, okay, I agree. And then the following week is exactly the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. How many times have you had that conversation with him?
It's probably been about, for me saying about the positive,
yeah.
I'd probably say only twice, to
Okay.
be fair. Yeah.
Okay. So I wonder if there's when you talk to him about making the conversations more positive, have you explained to him the impact of when he's negative?
I haven't actually. No, I've kind of kept that in. Yeah.
Okay, because that's the difficult conversation, right?
Yeah.
The easy conversation is, could we make things more positive? The difficult conversation is, when you bring a lot of negative issues, it starts to drain me, it starts to drain the team, and my concern is that could start to impact performance. So what are the implications of what he's doing today? Because if he just thinks, oh, well, Tanya just wants to have more positive conversations, right? He's more likely to, whatever, and carry on, right? If we can explain, if you can help him to see the impact of his negative, attitude, behaviors, input, and then say, the reason I want more positive conversations is because I want my team energized. I want, we're performing right now. I want to accelerate and maintain that momentum.
Yeah, sure.
And almost say, help him to see he's putting that at risk with what he's contributing. And that if he was more positive, then actually it would benefit you, benefit the team. It might even make him feel better about the situation. So I think perhaps I'm not saying that's going to be the fix, Tanya, but it certainly might make him wake up to what's really happening.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great feedback. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Justin.
That's okay. Anybody else got any ideas or thoughts on this as well?
It's a really interesting problem, just thinking out loud, because I think, Tanya, first of all, thanks for bringing that in, because it does make you think, actually. It sounds like there's no filter between
Correct.
the leader receiving I'm just thinking from a leadership perspective, rather than processing it and thinking about, like Justin says, how can I rephrase this to make it in a different sort of more, it's almost like he's not there. You might as well just be talking to the CEO and getting that negative. And it sounds like lack of maturity, lack of leadership skills. There's a load of things, but it's just there's no filter, is there? That's the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Thinking that, like, just back to him, whether it will make him think that, and I think that would be the interesting, whether he can actually adjust to that. And if he can't, then I think there's a different conversation to have.
Yeah, certainly. No, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. No, thanks for bringing that, Tanya, because that's not an easy situation you're dealing with, and hopefully that gives you, something that you can at least try. And then if that doesn't work, then you talked about going to the CEO. I mean, I would say that's probably a last resort, only because you don't want to alienate your immediate line manager. I have
not when they've worked together for 23 years.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I've had situations in the past where I've had a manager and I have had to involve my manager's manager in the situation because I couldn't get a resolution, but I did it with them both.
Okay.
Which was bloody awkward, I have to say.
Yeah.
But it did fix it.
Because I suppose that the topic of conversation today with, dealing with difficult conversations, etc. That's kind of why I wanted to bring this point up, because for me, it's not just learning how to have these conversations, with my team.
Yes.
It's learning to have those conversations with your fellow colleagues or your management that are, board members that are, in those positions of, power, shall we say, in some instance. So it's, for me, it's kind of learning to sideward scale and upward scale my conversation that, that's difficult, not just with the people that I'm managing.
Yes.
Which I feel is slightly more awkward, if not a lot more awkward.
I completely agree. Those conversations are even more difficult because you do run the risk of it becoming personal.
Yes.
And you don't want to put your own relationship at risk with that person. But I think the fact that you said you've got a good relationship with him, you've worked together a long time. I think if you can do it in a way that it's not about and I think you'll toe this line, you have to tread it carefully. It's not about criticism. It's about behavior and impact. And I think if you can separate it, that can be really useful.
No, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Floor over to somebody else now. Sorry for taking up a bit of time.
No, it's good. These conversations are interesting because we can all relate to it. We can all relate to when you've got that challenging manager, and how do you have those difficult conversations without jeopardizing your relationship with them? It's so important. It's a really delicate situation. Yeah, it's good. Who else would like to share some feedback on today's session, or maybe get some advice if you want some advice?
Everybody's good.
Everyone good?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Good. Okay, couple of things and then we'll wrap up. So we're at 10 to the hour. So that's good. Good timing. Let me just share. There's a couple of things I was going to share with you. Hold on a sec. Where's my Zoom link gone? There we go. Okay, so some of you would have seen this before. There's a couple of resources that I was going to share with you. So the first is this leadership scorecard we have. It's a completely free tool. The link is here on the screen. Let me just put that in the chat. Hold on a sec. Let me put that link in the chat because it's a diagnostic test. It takes you about 10 to 15 minutes. And what it does is it'll give you some ideas about where you can start to focus as a leader. If you're interested in kind of coaching and being able to take an approach that really does start to foster greater responsibility in your teams. The other tool I was going to mention to you is this tool. We use this toolkit as part of our programs called the Coaching Leaders Toolkit. There's loads of documents in here that are really, feedback on them is really good. You'll see in here there's all sorts of delegation checklist, delegation tool, there's listening tools, questioning tools. The latest one, I don't think it's in here, but it's got that difficult conversations talk track, the 5 stages. So yeah, there's an updated version with that included as well. If you'd like any of those tools, let me know. I'll happily send them over to you, because sometimes just having access to those kind of tools is really useful. And they're things that I've developed over the years, like playbooks on how do you start to manage these situations differently. And then the final thing I'll just share with you is that one of the things that I've determined and discovered over my career is actually trying to understand, what does it take to be successful in leadership? And I think you need 5 things. First thing you need a space to have confidential conversations, to be able to talk in confidence outside of your own organization. You need a community of people who are prepared to listen and kind of almost support you and work with you. You need the opportunity to collaborate, so you can share and learn ideas from people, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And within organizations, there's not always that external objectivity. And also we need someone or some people to challenge the way that we work today. Challenge our ideas, challenge our perceptions, so that we start to think differently. And then finally, a commitment to make the change, because even if we do have some new ideas, implementation is where the real impact happens. So we have to make a commitment to somebody to make sure that we deliver on what we're looking to do. So I share those with you because they're ideas. We bake them into our programs. I also wanted to share, if anybody would like a one-to-one, I offer kind of complimentary 45-minute discovery session. If you would like a discovery session, you can follow the link here. Let me just put that in the chat. But I will also send you this in the follow-up email from today. So you'll have a link to my calendar. If anybody wants to book a short one-to-one with me, feel free to do so. You may not get me until October, simply because next Thursday I go on holiday for about 2.5 weeks, and then I'm not back until I think it's the 1st of October I'm back. So you might be lucky to get one slot next week, but otherwise it'll be October. Okay, that is me. Let me stop sharing. I think I've stopped sharing my screen. Well, everybody, thanks so much for joining the session this morning. Really appreciate it. And I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've all got some value from this morning's session, at least, a takeaway that you can use in your business to improve, your either performance management or handling difficult conversations. So it just remains for us to say, thanks everyone for joining. Have a wonderful weekend when you get there. And I look forward to seeing you at a future session.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Good holiday.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Tanya. See you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a lovely holiday.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.